Hi everyone and welcome to my Boulder Druid guide for Season 8. This is a setup I've been playing and enjoying a lot lately, so I want to show this off for you. This is largely based on the Maxro Boulder guide by Danger. I have done some tweaks, but I also want to walk you through how to set this up. You can actually play this from relatively early stages and my gear here is far from optimized. Yes, I do have my Paragons and I have a Mythic equipped or two. But all of the druid specific stuff that I have is actually pretty potato. And what you see here is me just absolutely annihilating, like, pit mid 60s. And I think more optimized, there's no doubt that this can run through 70, even 75s in sub 2 minutes. This is a pretty fast build because you are actually just kind of this walking shredder and you can cast boulders while moving these days. So this is actually really good to actually farm Paragons, farm Torment 4 with. It goes pretty fast. Not only that, but it is actually also a relatively decent pusher. I have no doubt that this can go beyond pit 90 at the very least, maybe mid 90s or something like that. It is not as strong as Cataclysm, but a very fun alternative and strong way to play Druid. So I had a ton of fun with this and I want to show you what this is all about. So how does the setup work? Well, you need the Dolmen Stone. This is a hard requirement for this build to function. The main reason is because the boulders will start rotating around you together with the Hurricane. So usually you cast a boulder, it just rolls and that's it. But with the Hurricane active, it will start rotating. Not only that, but there's also a limit of 10 boulders and they last 10 seconds. So what happens is that you actually don't have to cast boulders all the time. You can kind of just like do a few casts and then you have 10 boulders rotating. You can actually see the stacks on your boulder skill right now, and then you have 10. And then you can kind of just like freely walk. You don't have to press anything basically. And then after a few seconds, you're just gonna keep walking and throw a few more boulders. But this means you need to have a permanent Hurricane going. Now, this is actually not that hard to achieve, luckily, because you have this nature magic cooldown reduction mod here on the Dolmen Stone. I don't even have a GA. You want to have a GA of this to get more of everything, but you can already make this work with non-ancestral. And you can get Hurricane duration tempers. So for example, here as a utility temper on the boots, on the gloves, on the pants even, you can put Hurricane duration. And you just need to make sure that your duration is longer than your cooldown, which is not that hard to achieve. In addition to the duration tempers, you also have the Endless Tempest passive here. So if you invest a few points, or you have, for example, Shroud of False Death, or later the Mjolnir Ring that also has ranks to that, it's very easy to get a permanent Hurricane uptime, even on a pretty potato character. Then we have the Metamorphic Stone aspect. This is the second hard requirement, basically, because this makes Boulder actually spammable, because without that, you will have a cooldown. So you need to have this aspect, and then instead of a cooldown, you will spend Spirit, and it will deal some damage. A quick note about this aspect here. So this is something that Danger told me about, actually. I did put this on a two-handed weapon because it looks like a massive aspect, but apparently there's some weird calculations going on that makes this not as desirable as a two-handed mod. Even though you would think, oh, this goes to 260%, this is incredible. But that's not actually the case. So this is just mostly for this effect of making it a core skill and removing the cooldown, and you put it on a normal slot. So once you have the Perma Hurricane, the Dolmen Stone, and the Metamorphic Stone, you can play this build. So it doesn't work from level 1, but it also doesn't have very high requirements. This thing is from Duriel, Andariel, and Harbinger. You can just get it there. And this is just a random aspect you can find. So I was leveling my Druid with Tornado and Companions, basically. And then as soon as I managed to gamble this, and actually the amulet, I gambled it, then I was online and I was starting to blast. Another really good piece to get though is Mjolnir Ring. The reason for that is it removes the cost of your skills as long as you have Cataclysm active. So this is not a Cataclysm Druid. Cataclysm doesn't really do the damage here, but this gives us a massive damage buff and infinite resources. So it's really nice to include here. Now, getting a permanent Cataclysm going is a little bit more difficult than getting a permanent Hurricane going, but also not that hard to achieve. So again, we have the Endless Tempest ranks here that increase the duration. There's also the Spirit Boon here for extra duration, and then again, the Nature Magic cooldown here that I have on the neck. So you have a little bit of that. You get to the point where, for example, for me, I have 26 seconds duration, 25 seconds cooldown, easy perma Cataclysm, and this can be a lot better on the cooldown part here. So like this, you have infinite resources, you have a big damage buff, you have the Hurricane with the boulders going, and the entire setup just works. Now, before you get Mjolnir Ring, I was actually running with a Lum rune. So what I was doing was Neo plus Lum. Lum is the resource rune. This is this one here. So basically every 2 seconds I would just gain a good chunk of resources, basically filling my entire resources. And since we don't have to cast the boulders non-stop anyway, this was easily enough to solve all my worries here. So before Mjolnir Ring or before Perma Cataclysm, you can do that. And then, for example, once you get this ring, even if your Cataclysm cooldown is too long and the duration too little, you can still make it work with the Zek rune. This is this one here. So after I got the Mjolnir Ring, I went for Neo plus Zek. And like this, I would get basically double the amount of cooldown recovery for my ultimate. So for example, if you have like a 40-second cooldown, 20 seconds duration, that is actually working out when you have the Neo plus Zek rune combo. So I just had that. And by now I have the Perma Cataclysm, I don't need the resources, I don't need the cooldown. So we're doing Neo plus Xan. And with Xan, we have a lot of overpowers. And overpowers is the real damage here. So this is pretty standard for especially bear druids. This is a bear build. So you see every time we cast, we transform into bear. This is because of Vasili's Prayer. The earth skills are now werebear skills. This opens up a lot of synergies on the passive tree, on the Paragons, and so on. So there's really good stuff you can get here. You also get Perma Fortify, which helps with your overpower damage. And in general, we're actually stacking a good bunch of life here. On my setup with a potion up and everything, I get to like 30,000 life, 30,000 barrier. I always have perma barrier because I use the Blackmailer sabotage power here. Whenever you get Fortify, we gain barrier. We gain Fortify from various ways, including just casting the skill. And like this, you are well protected. You have lots of overpower damage. You trigger overpowers regularly, both from the rune, but even without the rune, you can get regular overpowers thanks to the Obsidian Slam. Every 7th Earth skill cast gives you an overpower. And the Provocation, where with 4 ranks, it's every 8 seconds. With 3 ranks, every 12 seconds, you get a guaranteed overpower. So effectively, you will have the Hurricane going, you cast a Cataclysm on cooldown, and then you just make sure you have 10 boulders active all the time. And then you can kind of just chill and run. You can press like a Cyclone Armor, you can press Shred to teleport around. Like this, you can like jump from pack to pack really fast. I also have a Jar rune here, so we can really fly. And as I said, I can do some pits in like 90 seconds or so with this setup. For a little bit more of an optimized playstyle, you only care about the overpower boulders. Like the normal boulders will not really do any damage at all because overpower scaling is ridiculous in the late game. So you see here we have these orange numbers. I have all the numbers turned off, so I only see the overpowers basically. And like this, it's relatively easy to tell how many boulders are actually overpowering right now. So right now it looks like there's 1, now there's 0. And then we cast a few and I have like 2 or 3 now. You see there's a lot more numbers. And you can kind of get a feel for this if you look at the number of orange hits that they produce, because you have 100% crit in the late game setup. It's always going to be orange when you overpower crit. And like this, you can sometimes just kind of like stop casting and just let the overpower boulders do their work for a few seconds, basically. So this is like a bit of a more advanced late game optimization you can do with all the guaranteed overpowers you're getting. But it also doesn't hurt to kind of just like spam it because, for example, you get more Fortify, getting more barrier and so on. And you don't really have to try hard this necessarily, at least for farming content. But you can squeeze out a little bit more damage if you want to, if you try to time this. Now, a few other notes here. You see I have 2 mythics equipped, the Shroud of False Death. This is obviously a very strong item for almost every single build in the game, including this one. Before that, there's Insatiable Fury. This is the Bear Chest. It's also very strong. It's probably really close, actually, in terms of overall DPS output, maybe a little bit less on the defensive side, but this build is fairly tanky. You get the defensive posture ranks here, for example, which is a very strong defensive passive here. You get a lot of DR there. You have damage reduction from the heightened senses. You stack a lot of life. We have Mending. We have the Cyclone Armor and the Bulwark. So overall, you're a pretty beefy boy here. And you don't really have anything to worry about in terms of defense. Even Torment 4 bosses, I think you can probably tank almost every single attack with this setup once you're like set up. I've been farming at least all of the Torment 3 bosses and some Torment 4 bosses already with this build. And once this is fully decked out, I have no worries at all, even on hardcore. And the other ring that we have here is the Ring of Starless Skies. It's a pretty powerful ring, but also not really a hard requirement for this or something, because we don't care about the resource portion of this anyway, since we have the Mjolnir. This just gives us infinite resources. So it's not even like required to make the setup work or something like that. It's just a good offensive statted ring, basically. So you can get away with a legendary one, which will just have one of the like pretty powerful druid aspects that exist. and then gonna be fine. So in this case here, we have the natural balance aspect, and the good thing is also you can get some extra Cataclysm cooldown reduction as a temper as well. So this makes the whole setup easier to play actually. So in case you're having trouble with keeping your Cataclysm when you have the Mjolnir ring, then you can do that, and this will help out to keep it up a bit more easily, and then transition to the Xan rune setup a bit more. In general, it's worth noting that the rune setup can change a little bit, so I already explained how I made the transition from like the early game to like a better and better setup, and then eventually I arrived at the Neo Xan. If you don't, for example, go for the boss power combo with like the perma barriers from blackmailers, then you might want to change this. So for example, Danger has Bagja, which is actually what I'm running as well. And then he has Igni Xan, which is also fine to proc the overpowers here. Instead of Neo, it's a little bit slower, but that also works in case you're not permanently barriered or you have trouble with the uptime, for example, then this is also totally fine. And then, for example, for like, you know, higher end content or like pushing or so, you would maybe swap this a little bit. Here he has Igni Watt to proc the Decrepifies, which also gives you the Execute and the slows. And then you have, for example, Ahu Xan, because you actually have pretty decent amount of lucky hits. And the Cataclysm in particular has very high lucky hit chance to trigger Ahu rune here. But there are some things you can use to trigger this. You can also do Xol Xan, for example, when you have the Igni Watt. So with Xol, this means every time you trigger another class skill, in this case the Decrepify, you can also generate a lot of offering. So I think he has it in one of the other variants here. So there are various ways to trigger this and try to min-max this a little bit depending on what's available to you. So besides the metamorphic stone aspect, that is kind of the key here, there are also these other two strong aspects you want to go for. One is retaliation, it gives you up to a 75% multi. It's incredibly strong, and we have perma fortify anyway. And then we have the Changeling stat, which is also a 65% multi. So Druid has really strong aspects like these, and this gives you like tons of damage multipliers. And the same for the Paragons. There are a number of really strong legendary nodes. We have Ancestral Guidance here, where you do more damage after spending Spirit. You may be wondering, how do we do that? Even with the Cataclysm up, for example. Well, it does work when the Cataclysm and the Mjolnir ring are going. For some reason, it still counts spending Spirit. So you don't have anything to worry about. The same thing goes for the starter Sky's Ring. It just works. So you don't really worry. You have Survival Instincts, which gives us a massive damage bonus in bear form and also more overpower damage. And the thing about this is that it also increases your damage done in later stages of the fight, because you are generally going to be at full HP and full fortify, and then as the monster HP drops lower, you actually deal more damage to them with Survival Instincts. So keep that in mind when you're, for example, fighting bosses. It goes a bit faster later on. We have Hide and Malice, so you get an extra damage buff for poisoning enemies, which you do very easily because our boulders are actually poisoning. And we also have like various other triggers for that. And then we have the Earthen Devastation here. So this is something where you want to stack crowd control damage, but you actually get all of it just from the Paragons here itself. So there's a lot of crowd control, here's crowd control damage, and it kind of like stacks itself. As for the glyphs, we have Spirit for the crit. We want to go for 100% crit chance because we want to get the crit overpowers, which is not that hard to achieve here, especially when you have a starter Sky's Ring. There's a lot of crit on that. We can also temper Earth crit chance. So this is here, for example, an offensive temper. You just put that on a bunch of items. You need to count that together with the sheet crit chance that you have. It is not included in this number, so you just want to make sure you don't overshoot basically, but you kind of just get there if you just have like regular crit rolls and a few of these tempers basically. So it just pretty much exactly works out by default. Then we have the Dominate glyph here. This is for overpower damage. We overpower all the time. We have the Keeper. Boulder is usually a physical skill, but with one of the upgrades, it becomes a poison skill, so we go for the non-physical here. Then we have Headhunter. This is mostly kind of like a, you know, whatever slot. So you can also do another one here. For example, if you feel a little bit too squishy for whatever reason, then Undaunted is a good glyph as well. It gives you 15% damage reduction. So this might be worth slotting in, especially on hardcore. And then we have the Earth and Sky here again for nature magic skills. And depending on the setup you're playing, the skill tree usually stays largely the same. So we usually want to have the Hurricane, of course, to make sure we have the combo going. You want to fully invest into Boulder. You see here, this can go up to 31 ranks. And the Cataclysm. So depending on how far you are with your cooldowns and your Endless Tempest ranks, you can also invest some more points in Cataclysm. For example, I have like 3 or 4 points right now just to bring down the cooldown a little bit. But once I get better cooldown rolls on my gear, then you can take points out. This might be a trick early on when your setup is kind of scuffed. If you want, you can get more Fortify here from the Bulwark. I'm running that, for example. But you also have like perma Fortify already from other sources, including this passive here and the helm. So you usually shouldn't be worried about it. but it's like a backup here in case you want to get more barriers from the boss power, for example. Another thing worth highlighting is Ancestral Fortitude. Depending on what exact gear you have, how much res you have, and also the Paragons, then you might actually be able to take out some of these points here and put them somewhere else. So this might just be overcapped. And in my case, I actually moved 1 or 2 points on this passive already because I just have enough resistances. So keep that in mind. And there are a bunch of other like pretty powerful passives you can pick up here on the way. So something like Nature's Reach actually kind of works with the right positioning. You can do that. You can do even more Fortify if you want here. There's also like a bunch of other passes like Defensive Posture down here. So if you have leftover points, you can redistribute them a little bit into these kind of things. And also the last skill slot is kind of like an open tech slot. So here, for example, is the Claw. The main reason to use this is so they can shift very easily between wolf form and bear form. This is important, especially here for a quick shift and for heightened senses. You get like a kind of permanent bonus for shifting a few times at the start of the run, as long as you stay in a transformed state for the rest of the run, which we basically always do, since every time we cast Boulder, we go into bear form. So we basically always in bear form, we never lose these buffs, as long as you press the button like every 3 seconds. And you just need to make sure that you transform a few times. So this is why there's Claw here, or for example, in like speed farming variants, there's Shred. With Shred, you can kind of just like teleport around from pack to pack. You have to aim at an enemy to go there, but this also allows you to really fly. Even without a Jar rune, for example, you can just fly through Torment 4 runs and just everything dies around you, basically. And that's also pretty much it for the setup. Now you can obviously min-max this further and so on. Like my character here, as I said, is really not set up yet. I expect that if I optimize this further, I'll definitely go to like 70 plus, 75s, like, 2-minute runs, no problem at all. And you're gonna just like decimate with this. So I had a ton of fun with the Boulder Druid. Hope you too. So wish you good luck if you're trying this out. A lot of people have been very excited seeing me play this, and well, I can just recommend it. So go check out the Maxwell Guide by Danger as well if you want to see more of the details. As I said, my setup is almost exactly the same anyway, so I'll leave you with that. And good luck. See you guys next time.